Before we get started, make sure all cell phones are turned off. I don't know what happened, but make sure once we get started that not happen, because I will take that unit regardless of whoever owns it. It's John Morris. It's John Morris.
Richard Combs. Your Honor, we're here in the interest of Richard Combs. His attorney, Mr. Pascoe, informs me that the defendant wishes to enter a negotiated plea. Mr. Combs is going to plead straight up to misconduct in office, and the state's going to dismiss the murder indictment. Also present in the courtroom, just so I can put this on the record, are Mr. Bernard Bailey's wife, Ms. Doris Bailey, Mr. Bailey's sister, Joanne Lawton, his brother, William Bailey Sr., Mr. Bailey's children, Brianna, Portia, and Kayla are here as well. And when the court deems appropriate, I know that Mr. William Bailey and Ms. Lawton would like to address the court.
Please raise your right hand. You hereby swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Pascoe, what I'll probably do is after you tell me about the facts of the case and let out, I'll probably let them speak. And then after I take the plea, I'll let Mr. Pascoe and Mr. Combs speak if they wish to.
Yes, sir. And one more person I forgot to mention, Lieutenant Charles Kent from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. He was the lead investigator on this case. He's in the courtroom as well. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Pascoe, you and Mr. O'Leary have been representing Mr. Combs as my neighbor for some time.
That's correct, Your Honor.
And some of the questions I want to ask, I know Mr. Combs are going to seem odd because I've been the sitting judge through one trial, and we've done a second trial, but just to keep the record straight, I have to ask all of these questions just so you'll understand it.
Yes, Your Honor.
You had an opportunity, I know, to review with your client all of the evidence that the state has against him.
Several times, Your Honor.
Yes, sir. And you've explained to him his constitutional rights
I have.
and the law that applies in this fact situation.
I have, Your Honor.
Okay. He has indicated to you that he wishes to plead guilty now to the misconduct in office charge.
That's correct, Your Honor.
And it's my understanding that he's pleading guilty without any kind of recommendation from the state.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you believe it's in his best interest to plead guilty?
I do, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Mr. Combs, you are 38 years old?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Combs, your attorney, I know your attorneys have, in fact, gone over all the evidence the state has against you regarding this charge.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And we've now gone through 2 trials.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And you are very well aware of your constitutional rights.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I put in the form the constitutional rights I included in the packet to the court.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right. And you've understood everything your attorneys have told you?
Yes, sir.
They've answered all your questions?
Yes, sir.
They have done as you have requested them to do in representing you, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. I've been made aware of the fact that you now wish to plead guilty to misconduct in office, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Now, have you understood everything your attorneys have told you?
Yes, Your Honor.
Are you satisfied with their services as your attorney?
Yes, Your Honor.
Do you need any more time to talk with them?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Now, Mr. Combs, have you ever been treated for any mental health issues?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Ever been treated for any drug or alcohol abuse or dependency?
No, Your Honor.
Today, are you under the influence of any medication at all?
No, Your Honor.
Are you under the influence of any alcohol or illegal drugs?
No, Your Honor.
So you are thinking clearly today.
Yes, Your Honor.
You know exactly what you did.
Yes, sir.
Now, has anybody promised you anything to get you to plead guilty?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, now, you know that your attorneys and the solicitor's office have talked to me, we've been talking about this on and off since January, even before the trial.
Yes, Your Honor.
And you are aware that your attorney has, I'm sure, talked to me and told you he's talked to me about certain things.
Yes, sir.
About sentencing, as has the solicitor's office.
Yes,
Okay?
sir.
But you understand that the aspect of sentencing, whatever they told you, what you get sentenced to today is determined by me.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. All right. All right. You understand what you're doing, you know what you're doing, you want to go forward with the plea.
Yes, sir.
Nobody's forcing you to do this.
No, sir.
You're thinking clearly.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Mr. Pascoe.
Yes, sir. Facts?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. This court, of course, is very familiar with the facts of this case, so I'm going to be very brief on them. In fact, I'm going to be much more lengthy when it comes to the procedural history than the facts. This incident occurred on the morning of May 2nd, 2011. The defendant, who was the chief of police for the town of Utahville, attempted to serve the victim, Bernard Bailey, with an arrest warrant for obstruction of justice that the defendant got. Mr. Bailey tried to flee the scene and not receive the warrant. The defendant placed himself inside the doorway of the victim's truck, and as the truck was backing up, the defendant shot the victim, Mr. Bailey, 3 times. The indictment, Your Honor, for misconduct in office is for excessive force by the defendant, really for poor judgment, a totality of poor judgment starting back in March of that year, that he unlawfully breached his duty of accountability and failed to discharge the duties of his office by using excessive force. Procedurally, SLED initiated the investigation back in May of 2011. Within weeks, really, not even a month or so, but within weeks, the FBI and the Department of Justice took the lead on the investigation, and SLED, for the most part, was off the case. After 22 months, approximately 22 months later, the Department of Justice informed SLED in my office that they declined prosecution. So in March of 2013, SLED in my office started reviewing the case. SLED tried to pick up, even though almost 2 years had gone by, they tried to pick up where the Department of Justice had left off in re-interviewing witnesses and going over the facts. After we reviewed the facts, I determined that there were some inconsistencies I felt in the statements, inconsistencies in the evidence. We believed that there was excessive force in my office. So on August the 12th of 2013, Lieutenant Gint from SLED in my office and other witnesses presented an indictment for misconduct in office to the Orangeburg County Grand Jury, and they true-billed that indictment. We had verbal plea negotiations after that period. That was with Mr. O'Leary. I didn't know Wally at that time. I need to point this out too. I haven't dealt with more ethical attorneys or better attorneys to deal with than Mr. Pascoe and Mr. O'Leary in this case. They've been really good to deal with. When we needed to pick trial dates or dates for motions, very accommodating, and I appreciate that, so thank you. But there were talks back then of plea negotiations. The defendant exercised his right, which he perfectly had the right to do, decline them. November of 2014, as Your Honor recalls, we had a stand your ground hearing before this court, and this court denied the defendant's stand your ground motion. December 2014, but after that hearing, an Orangeburg County grand jury indicted the defendant for 1 count of murder. And as Your Honor knows, and I want to explain this to everybody, and I explain this to the victim's family, our law is really tied the state's hands and the grand jury's hands on what the defendant could be charged with regards to the homicide. As you know, you can't indict somebody for voluntary manslaughter for the most part because it has separate and distinct offenses, different elements. And that's why you seldom, if ever, see a voluntary manslaughter, just that charge go to a jury. And even though a lot of people thought that this was a case of reckless disregard, including a lot of law enforcement agencies, law enforcement officers who approached me about this case, you can't present an involuntary manslaughter case because under the law you can't have involuntary manslaughter when somebody's shot intentionally 3 times. So it really tied the grand jury's hands. There was only 1 homicide indictment they could come back with, and they did. And there was 1 count of murder on the defendant. We had 2 trials in this case. The first one was a month after that indictment here in Orangeburg, and that jury hung 9-3 for guilty. Just 6 months later, we tried the case again in Richland County, and that jury hung 8-4 for guilty. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more in just a second. I can tell you that in my 20-plus years as a prosecutor, I don't know that I've had a more polarizing case when it comes to people's opinion as to someone's guilt or innocence. I've met with many, many law enforcement officers who say the defendant is guilty and should be charged. I met with many law enforcement officers who said he shouldn't have been charged and wasn't guilty. We had 4 judges, and I'm not going to mention who they are or what their opinions were. I had 4 judges actually watch this same trial. Mr. Pascoe and I talked to at least 3 of them together. 4 judges. 2 judges said guilty, no doubt about it if it was a bench trial. 2 judges said not guilty, no doubt about it. There was no gray area. And I think to just show when I'm talking about no gray area, that last trial we had in Richland County, I've spoken with several of those jurors. Yes, it was 8-4 for guilty, but you couldn't get more divided. It was 4 for murder, 4 for voluntary manslaughter, and 4 for not guilty. One of my best friends got to talk to one of the not guilty jurors and just asked that juror, you know, is there any way y'all could have reached a verdict? What if there was another charge, like involuntary manslaughter or misconduct? And that juror was very honest, said, no, probably not. So again, it just shows you how there's no gray area. I was in talks with Mr. Pascoe about the next trial date, and he was very accommodating, worked with me. We were planning on calling his case for trial October the 26th, that soon. However, he came to me and said, look, my client is willing to entertain a plea to get this behind him. I immediately met with the Bailey family, and I asked them, you know, would they to choose whether they would like me to make an offer of either misconduct in office or involuntary manslaughter, and they asked me to make an offer of misconduct in office. I did that. I told Mr. Pascoe within 24 hours, he called me and said that he would plead guilty to misconduct in office. And that's why we're here today. Finally, just a few points I want to make. You know, nothing good, of course, comes out of this case for anybody, especially after the loss of Mr. Bernard Bailey. But if anything, the one thing or one of the things this case has done, or some of the things, it has certainly opened up the dialogue on how officer-involved shootings need to be investigated. There have been changes, a lot of because of this case. Of course, one of the major topics in South Carolina is body cameras. And I got calls from dozens of legislators asking for my opinion on that. And thanks to Senators Embry and Malloy, we've got some legislation on that. But even more importantly, personally, I got to tell you that being able to meet the Bailey family just makes you a better person. They are a tremendous family. I didn't know Bernard Bailey, but I know he had to be a wonderful, wonderful person, because his wife, his daughter, his sister, his brother, who I've gotten to know in the last 2 years, they don't come any finer than the Bailey family. So again, nothing good comes out of this, but I really appreciate their support. They've had the patience of Job. They had to wait nearly 4 years before they even got the facts to come out in this case. So I really appreciate their support and getting to know them. And again, if Your Honor wants to hear from them now or later, I know that I know that Ms. Lawton and Mr. William Bailey would like to be heard.
Okay. I think what I'm going to do is
Okay.
take the plea.
Sure.
Then I'm going to let them speak. Then I'm going to let Mr. Pascoe, you speak, or Mr. O'Leary.
Yes, sir.
However y'all want to handle that. Okay. All right. Mr. Combs, you know, I've been through one trial already with you. You know, you've been through 2 trials, and you. It's my understanding that you are pleading guilty to this misconduct in office charge.
Yes.
This was a true bill indictment for this back on August 13, 2013. And the indictment reads that in Orangeburg County, South Carolina, on about May 2nd, 2011, the defendant, you, Mr. Combs, police chief of the county of Utahville, and sworn law enforcement officer, doing willfully and unlawfully breached the duty of accountability to the public by failing to properly and faithfully discharge the duties of his office, and that while effecting the arrest of an individual, Bernard Bailey, he willfully and unlawfully used deadly force to whip, shooting, and killing Mr. Bernard Bailey when use of deadly force was not necessary, thereby violating the common law of the state of South Carolina. Do you understand the allegations in this indictment?
Yes, Your Honor.
How do you plead to this charge of misconduct in office?
Guilty, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Combs, you understand, if I accept your guilty plea, or misconduct in office, it will be a conviction on your record.
Yes, sir.
You understand you have 10 days from today's date to appeal my sentence.
Yes, sir.
Do you want me to accept your guilty plea?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Combs, I find that your decision to plead guilty is freely, voluntarily, intelligently made. I find you've had the advice and counsel of a competent warrior, I find that you're satisfied with the services of your warriors. I find there's a factual basis on which to base your guilty plea, and I am going to accept your guilty plea. All right. Mr. Pascoe, I'm glad to hear from
Thank you.
family members.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Hey, how are you?
Good afternoon.
Yes, ma'am. I need you, if you'd say your name for the record.
Okay, my name is Joanne Bailey Lawton.
Okay. Ms. Long, I'd be glad to hear from you.
Okay. My name is Joanne Bailey Lawton, and Bernard Bailey was my brother. Bernard and I were born 11 months apart. Growing up, we used to tease each other that we were twins. He was my friend, my protector, and my confidant. Throughout the 2 trials, you have heard about Mr. Bailey, the man who went to Utahville Town Hall to take care of a ticket for his daughter. That was my brother. He was a caring husband, a devoted father, a son that took care of his parents' needs, and a brother who was always willing to lend a helping hand. As a young man, Bernard's first job was delivering newspaper for the Post and Courier. We grew up in the town of Utahville, where Bernard was killed. It was less than a mile from where we grew up. Our parents owned a grocery store in Utahville for more than 50 years. When Bernard was killed, the most important tribute was made by a former student of his. The young man told us that when Bernard would deliver groceries to his grandmother's house, he would talk about how Bernard would always take the time to play basketball with him, ask him how he was doing in school, and gave him advice. He went on and said that Bernard was more than a delivery boy. He was a friend. That was the type of person my brother was. To know Bernard was to love Bernard. My mother was 90 years old when Bernard was killed, and the impact of his sudden death was impossible for her to cope with. Bernard would visit my mother every morning after he got off of work. He would run errands for her, cut her grass, sit and talk with her. When Bernard died, Doris was left without a husband that took care of her every needs. His children were left without a father who would move mountains for them. Bernard left granddaughters who only have vague memories of him. The Bailey family will never be the same because of the poor decision of Richard Combs on May 2nd, 2011. We have been on a mission for justice. We know that the outcome of this trial will not help Bernard, but maybe it will help some other family, some other young man.
Here,
Yes, sir.
I'm the oldest brother of 8 other siblings. I left Utahville, South Carolina. Bernard was a baby. Joanne was 11 months old, as she stated, and Bernard was a little bit older. He was 11 months older than my sister Joanne. I left Utahville to pursue an education at Howard University in Washington, D.C. I was Bernard's idol. He admired me as his big older brother. And I tried to exemplify what it was all about. To be first a God-fearing child. We were a very Christian-minded family. My mother and father taught us to love one another, to treat people the way you would want to be treated. Not to steal, not to kill. That's what the Bible said. Thou shalt not kill. And we believed in that. I would come home several times a year to visit my parents, my sisters, and my brothers. And when I would come home, Bernard would always come to me and say, "Bill, how are you?" And I would say to Bernard, "I'm doing fine.
I'm setting an example for the rest of you. Get a good education, work hard, take care of your family, and tell the truth. And God will take care of you. And be fair with people. If you can't do something good for somebody, leave it alone. That's what my mother and father taught us. Bernard went on and finished high school, went to Tennessee State, played basketball, went overseas and played basketball. I was elated when I got a phone call. Bernard is overseas playing basketball. I said, oh, here come my mother, big house. He's going to take care of Mama because we love our family. That's the way we were taught, to love one another. So Bernard went to overseas and he stayed for a while and he came back and he pursued a job in the correction department. He was an officer. He took care of people. That's what we were taught. When Bernard and Doris got married, I was right there. He called me and he told me he was getting married. I came and I was there and I supported him until the last minute. On May 2nd, when I got the call from my sister Shirley, she said, Bill, Bernard just got killed in Utahville. I couldn't believe it. I was coming from one of my real estate property. I pulled my car over to the side and I talked to the Lord. I talked to the Lord. And from that very day on, I've been talking to the Lord and asking him to let justice prevail. That's all I ask. That's all I ask. And all I'm saying, I'm honored, Judge. I'm honored for the defense. I'm honored to Solicitor Pascoe. And I'm honored to you. And I'm honored to each and every one of you who are here today. Because God knows exactly what happened. We can't bring Bernard back. But Lord, just let justice prevail. That's all we ask. He has a family. He has children. He has grandchildren. And God knows whatever I can do to instill in his children, in his grandchildren, and his wife, I will be there. I just turned 75 years old. August the 15th. My family took care of me. They gave me an unbelievable party. I said to them, if you want to do something for me, I'll be there. I drove from Silver Spring to be with my family. And I thought, as I was there, I could imagine if Bernard was there, his older brother that he admired. I pulled into his yard one day, Judge. I had just purchased a brand new automobile. He was on the phone. He didn't even come to the car because he didn't know who I was. And when he came to the car, he said, oh my God, Bill, get out, get out. Let me drive this car. That's how he loved his brother, and his brother loved him. I just ask today that justice prevail. I know that it's been a long time, some 54 months, 4 years, 3 months, and about 20-some days. But I thank God that we are here. And I thank God for each and every one of you that is in this courtroom today. We will go on because God will give us the strength. We will go on. But we will not go on with Bernard, but we will go on in his memory. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Judge Dickerson. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buddy. I appreciate it. Anything else?
Your Honor, I'll just point out, he's absolutely right. Mr. Bailey was a people person. Y'all may recall, we had a juror in Orangeburg jury. We took her in the back to talk to her. She knew Mr. Bailey from when he worked at the Walmart in Somerville and said she couldn't be fair and impartial because of what a wonderful person Mr. Bernard was. And I'm going to tell you, I had more people from Somerville, which is in my circuit, come up to me to ask me about Mr. Bernard's case, and even in Orangeburg, because of how loved he was down there in that community. I want to point that out. Thank you.
I do remember when we question the jury, is that what? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Client, Mr.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, my client's 38 years old. He's high school educated. He received several years of college education at Rice State. Your Honor, he has no record. This is all very, very new. The only record that my client has is years of service to law enforcement since 2001 and 4 years of service to his country in the Marines. Your Honor, these are tough facts, but my client is here. He is pleading guilty to misconduct in office. He accepts responsibility for his role in that day, and he wishes terribly, maybe even with the benefit of hindsight, that it could have been done differently, and acknowledges it should have been done differently. And he's here, freely pleading guilty, Your Honor. But, Your Honor, those are tough facts. As Pascoe pointed out, and as you pointed out before, Your Honor, I had 3 law enforcement agencies look at this. 3 different law enforcement agencies looked at this. The FBI, the DOJ, SLED, and none of them, when they first looked at it, found any breach of the standard of care. None of them believed that the chief did anything other than he was trained to do, and none of them were going to prosecute. This case was not going to be tried but for the prosecution of the solicitor. And he has a right to see it differently, and he saw it differently, and he prosecuted it relentlessly. And but for that, Your Honor, we wouldn't be here. And I think it's important to take into consideration the fact that you have 3 objective law enforcement agencies that look at the same set of facts and come to very different conclusions. And it's not just law enforcement, Your Honor, that can't agree on how these facts should have been interpreted. We had 24 very fair, very dedicated, very educated, very qualified jurors look at this. And Pascoe and I often disagree on things, and we may disagree a little bit on what the split was on the juror. We felt like it was more of a 50-50 split, but regardless, wherever you came down on your verdict, they were passionate about it. There was no gray area. He was either guilty or he was not guilty, and the same story was being told every time, but what was being heard was so incredibly different. And so you would have jurors that would walk out and passionately say it was not guilty and he had absolutely no other choice. And then you had other jurors that would come out, and I candidly admit, unwavering, would have found him guilty of murder. Your Honor, I fully believe that if we tried this case 5 more times, we'd have 5 more mistrials. And we'd be giving the same quotes and the same stories and addressing the media the same way at the end of it, because 12 people are not going to be able to agree on these facts. But I'll be candid with you, Your Honor, my client is financially and emotionally exhausted. He has spent through 4 years of not knowing, 2+ years of prosecution, and 2 of the hardest weeks that I've ever been a part of. And I knew I was going home at the end of the day. Your Honor, he wants finality, he wants conclusion, not just for himself, but I can tell you also for the family and for the community. He wants to accept responsibility and move on. And I can tell you, Your Honor, as an officer of the court, which I take that very seriously, as Your Honor knows, the remorse and the grief for the Bailey family and Mr. Bernard Bailey is very sincere. And so whatever fear paralyzes my client on the stand, what the court doesn't get to see is the countless phone calls and the countless meetings and the tears after tears after tears about everybody's loss in this situation. Because it's as I've said the first time in open argument, there is no winning situation. No one will ever win this. Everybody has suffered tremendously on both sides of it. But we need to end it. And we need conclusion, and he's taking responsibility. And I'd ask that you take all those things into consideration, Your Honor, particularly his service to his country, his service to law enforcement, the fact that normal people, ordinary people, are so passionately divided on where we are. And issue a sentence, Your Honor, that reflects that and is fair.
Thank you. This has not been an easy case. In fact, it has been a very difficult case by virtue of what happened and the way the facts apply or don't apply to the law in this situation. And that's been proven by 2 hung juries that heard this case. First of all, I want to thank Ms. Bailey and her children in particular, and Mr. Bailey's entire family for their patience and composure during this entire process. I also want to thank Mr. Pascoe, the solicitor, and his staff for prosecuting this case. I believe several law enforcement agencies examined this case and decided not to prosecute. However, the solicitor's decision to go forward allowed all of the facts to come out in open court. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank you, Mr. Pascoe and Mr. O'Leary, and your staff for putting the state to its proof and for the manner in which you represented Mr. Combs in court. I again appreciate the way y'all handled this. This case was tried twice before 2 different juries in 2 different counties, and both resulted in hung juries. I'm satisfied that the juries that heard these cases were excellent juries. I know from the way we picked the first jury that they were well prepared for their duty. And I'm convinced the second jury was just as prepared. I'm also firmly convinced that further trials in this case would also result in very similar results and possibly hung juries. Sometimes no verdicts are decisions. And I believe this decision to plead to misconduct in office is a good resolution of this case. It brings us full circle back to your original indictment, and I believe confirms and justifies the solicitor's original reasoning behind the first indictment for misconduct in office. And finally, Mr. Combs, I appreciate your accepting responsibility in this case and bringing closure to this matter. I know everyone appreciates that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, normally, in a case like this, I'd probably have to think about it, and I'd step down and do that. But quite honestly, I have been thinking about this case, and it's been on my mind since January. And particularly when y'all told me it might be back for the 3rd time, I started thinking about it again. Mr. Combs, what I'm doing in this case, the sentence of this court, is that you're committed to the State Department of Corrections for a period of 10 years. I'm suspending that sentence on probation for 5 years with 1 year home detention with GPS monitoring. Okay? So what I'm going to ask you to do is Mr. Kittrell, if you'd go with Mr. Kittrell, who's with probation, we'll get everything set up with that.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you very much, Judge.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. All right, we'll be in recess for about 10 minutes. Thank you.